Montana Territory, July 1883. The sun was a cruel white eye overhead when the stagecoach buckled to a stop in the dust-blown town of Elkhorn Ridge, and Violetta Park stepped down with her gloved hands trembling. Her wedding dress was packed in the satchel slung over her shoulder, creased and slightly yellowed from the long ride west. She'd sewn it herself before leaving Kansas, every stitch a hope for a life she had not yet lived. Her heart pounded against the bones of her chest, not from excitement but fear, because she had not heard from William in nearly 2 months. And now, as she looked around the empty Main Street, there was no sign of him, no man waiting with flowers in hand, no one at all. A dog barked in the distance. A tumbleweed rolled across the wheel-rutted road. The wind picked up. She walked toward the livery where William had said he worked, clutching the letter from 3 months ago, the last one she'd received, where he promised her a little house outside town and a gold band waiting on her finger. The livery was locked. Dust filmed the windows. "Can I help you, ma'am?" came a voice, deep, calm, not unfriendly. Violetta turned. A man stood near the watering trough, leading a chestnut gelding. His hat shaded most of his face, but she could see the strong set of his jaw, his straight shoulders. He looked about 30, maybe older, sun-browned and steady. "I am looking for William Hale," she said, her voice catching. "He sent for me. We were going to be married." The stranger's brows pulled together. "William Hale left Elkhorn Ridge near 6 weeks ago, sold his saddle and headed south. Folks say he was chasing silver in Idaho." Violetta blinked. "He left." "Yes," the man said gently, "and I do not think he planned to come back." Her knees weakened. She sat down on the stoop of the old mercantile before her legs gave out completely. The stranger stayed quiet, but he did not walk away. "My name is Violetta Park," she said finally, lifting her face. "I came here with nothing but what I could carry. I have no family to go back to." Her voice wobbled. "I left Kansas for good reason." He nodded once. "I will not ask you what that was, but I will tell you I have a ranch about 5 miles west. It ain't much, but the roof holds. I could offer a day or 2 of shelter, until you figure what comes next." She stood wary. "You do not even know me." "No, ma'am," he said, "and you do not know me either." "My name is Hollis Fletcher." She met his gaze then, and there was no cruelty in it, just quiet steadiness, like a river that kept on flowing no matter what happened around it. "All right," she said softly. "Just a day or 2. They rode out of town on his horse, her satchel tucked behind him, the dry wind tugging loose strands of her dark hair. She did not ask where the road led. She had nowhere else to go. His ranch sat in a narrow valley with the mountains rising behind it, the grass long and gold in the summer heat. A wooden house leaned slightly to the left, and 2 barns flanked a corral where a few cattle chewed lazily. Hollis helped her down from the horse without a word. He did not touch her more than necessary, and he did not ask questions. "I sleep in the barn most nights anyway," he said. "You can have the house. No one else lives here." She stepped inside. The place smelled of dust and pine, but it was clean. A single bed, a table, a stove. A book sat open on the windowsill, something about farming. Violetta sank onto the edge of the bed and looked up at him. "You do not know what you are getting into." "I reckon that is true," he said. "But I know when someone looks like they have not eaten right in days." She swallowed. "I have not," he nodded once. "Then we will start with supper." That night, after cornbread and beans eaten in silence, Holly stepped outside and left her alone. Violetta watched the last of the light fade across the ridge, her fingers curled around the tin cup. She had not told him about the bruises she left behind in Kansas, or the man who said she was his, no matter what the law said. She had not told him how she had spent 3 years waiting tables at her road station, always looking over her shoulder. But she had looked into Hollis Fletcher's eyes and seen that he would not raise a hand to hurt her. And somehow, that had been enough. The next morning, she found him chopping wood near the edge of the barn. She stayed quiet until he paused for water. "I can help," she said. "You do not need, I want to." He handed her a smaller axe. She swung gently at first, then harder until she found her rhythm. By midday, her arms ached, but she had not thought about Kansas once. Later, she helped mend a fence. Then she washed the dishes while he repaired a broken wagon wheel. They did not talk much, but she caught him watching her once when the wind blew her hair loose and she laughed at the sight of a calf chasing a butterfly. He looked away quickly, but the warmth stayed in her chest. That night she asked, "Why do you live alone out here?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I used to ride with the army. After the war I came west, thought I could forget some things." "Did you?" "No," he said, "but I made peace with them." Violetta looked down at her hands. "I do not know if I ever will." "You do not have to know yet," he said softly. "You just have to keep going." The days passed. She stayed. One evening she cooked stew and he surprised her by bringing flowers from the creeked wild columbine, white and pale blue. He set them on the table like it was nothing. "Why?" she asked. He did not answer directly, just said, "They looked like something you might need." Her throat tightened. "I think I do." A week later they sat on the porch watching the sun go down. The air was warm and the sky burned orange above the hills. "I still do not know what I am going to do," she said. "You do not have to decide tonight." She turned toward him. "You never ask me questions." "I figure you will tell me what you want me to know." She nodded slowly. "Then, I ran away from a man who said I was his. He hit me once, then again I told the sheriff and he said I must have provoked it." Her voice broke. "So I left, found William's letter. He had been sweet once, I thought maybe. But he left too." "Yes." Hollis looked at her for a long time. "You are not anyone's to claim, Violetta, not unless you choose it." She looked up at him. "And what if I did?" His breath caught. "Then I would count myself lucky." Neither of them moved. The only sound was the wind in the grass and the slow thump of her heart. Then she leaned forward and kissed him. He did not pull away. His hand came to her cheek, gentle and warm, and he kissed her back like he had wanted to for days. When they pulled apart, she smiled for the first time in weeks. "I think I already chose." His face softened. "So did I." The wind shifted in the valley the next morning, bringing the scent of pine resin and wet earth, though the sky was clear. Violetta stood barefoot on the porch step, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders, watching a pair of sandhill cranes lift off from the marshy edge of the creek. Their wings beat slow and heavy, as if reluctant to leave the ground. Inside, she'd folded the quilt back neatly, swept the floor, and boiled coffee over the iron stove. She didn't know what time Hollis usually came in from the barn, but she wanted to be ready. When he stepped through the door, his shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow and his hands were streaked with oil. He nodded once, then reached for the tin cup she held out. "They're quiet birds," she said, her eyes still on the empty sky. He followed her gaze. "They'll be gone by autumn. Head down toward the Rio Grande." She looked at him then. "Have you ever left Montana?" His eyes didn't change, but something behind them went still. "Missouri during the war, and a bit of Wyoming after, but once I bought this place, I stayed." Couldn't see the point in chasing things that never last. She watched the steam curl from her cup. "I used to dream about California, ocean, lemon trees, linen dresses." A faint laugh escaped her. "Now I can't imagine wanting anything bigger than a clean floor and a man who says what he means." He set his cup down. "You've got both of those here." She didn't answer, but he saw the way her fingers tightened around the handle. Later, she walked the fence line with him, checking the posts for rot. The ground was uneven and dry beneath her boots, and the sun pressed down from overhead, but she didn't complain. "You mind if I ask you something?" he said. Hammer paused mid-swing. She stopped beside him. "All right. You ever think about staying?" She didn't answer right away. A kestrel flew low across the grass, chasing something unseen. "I think about what it would mean," she said slowly. "What I'd owe, what I'd be giving." He drove the nail in with 2 clean strikes. "You wouldn't owe me anything." "I know," she said. "That's what makes it different." That night, she found a pair of cotton gloves folded on the table. Not new, but mended carefully at the seams. She picked them up and looked toward the barn. His silhouette moved past the lantern light, slow and deliberate. She didn't go out to him, not yet. But she kept the gloves. The next morning brought a letter, carried by a rider from town. Hollis brought it in without a word, the envelope creased and torn at one corner. She opened it slowly, her breath tight, her hands stilled halfway down the page. "It's from the woman who ran the boarding house where I stayed in Kansas. He waited. She says he came by, the man I left." Her voice was steady, but her eyes didn't meet his. "Says he asked questions. Said he'd find me." Hollis didn't move. "I thought he might give up," she said after a long moment. "I thought, if I came far enough, I might disappear." He reached for the letter and set it gently on the table. "He doesn't know you're here." "No. But he's not the kind who stops." He watched her closely. "You want to leave?" She looked out the window where the sky stretched wide and unbroken. "If I run again, I'll never stop." "Then don't." She turned toward him. "And if he comes, then he'll find you're not alone this time." The silence between them was no longer empty. It held something solid now. She stepped closer. "You do that, for me." He didn't look away. "You're not just passing through anymore." She reached out, her fingers brushing his. "I don't want to be." He took her hand. Rough palms, warm and sure. She didn't speak again. She didn't need to. That night the lamp burned low in the window and the valley held its breath beneath the stars. The cattle had pushed through the far fence line again. Violetta stepped down from the wagon, the hem of her skirt catching in the grass as she followed Hollis through the swaying thistle toward the gap in the wire. He'd brought a coil of barbed wire and a canvas sack slung over one shoulder, tools clinking inside. The sun sat higher than it should have been by the time they reached it, too late to be morning, too early for evening. She leaned into the wooden post while he knelt to dig out the splintered bottom rail. His shirt darkened with sweat at the back, and she passed him the pliers when he reached for them without looking. "You always fix things yourself?" she asked. He glanced up once, squinting into the light. "Most everything here I built with these hands." "Easier to know what's wrong when it breaks." She folded her arms. "Seems a lonely way to live." "I reckon it was, until you sat down at my table." He didn't say it like a declaration, just true and set in the earth like a fence post driven deep. She didn't answer right away. The breeze caught the edge of her sleeve. She watched his hand steady the wire, the other wrapping it tight with practiced precision. "Did you ever think about marrying before?" she asked. His eyes stayed on the twist. "Once. A long time back, she married someone else. He wore a uniform and I didn't anymore." Violetta let that settle. "I've never been asked before, William, not proper." He straightened and wiped his brow with his sleeve. "And now?" She looked out over the field where the cattle grazed, their tails flicking at flies. "I think I'd say yes if it were the right man. Not because he offered, but because he asked, knowing who I am." He met her eyes. "I'd ask, when the time is right." She nodded once. "I know." They worked in silence after that, the kind that felt like it belonged there, unspoken but not empty. When the fence was mended and the tools packed away, they walked back with the wagon behind them, creaking under its own rhythm. That night, she didn't sleep in the house. She stood in the barn doorway, barefoot in the dirt, and waited until he looked up from where he was brushing down his horse. "I can't lie awake wondering anymore," she said. He set the brush down carefully, his eyes steady on hers. "You won't have to." They didn't speak again as he led her to the small room above the tack wall where a narrow cot sat beneath the sloped rafters. He'd cleared it. She could tell there was a folded blanket and a wooden box set to the side, emptied of tools. She sat on the edge, her knees tucked close, watching him light the lantern. "I used to dream that someone would see me and not flinch," she said. "Even after knowing what I ran from." "I see you," he said. "And I haven't looked away." Her breath caught, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she reached for his hand and held it in both of hers. His skin was rough, but his grip was careful, like he feared breaking something fine. "I want to stay," she said. "Not because I have nowhere else, because I want to." He nodded once, slow and sure. "I'll build that room off the kitchen," he said. "The one I always thought I might need someday." She smiled, and it felt like something blooming where nothing had grown in years. Later, with the lantern low and the wind rising outside, she rested her head against his chest. The quiet didn't need filling. He ran a hand slowly through her hair, his other arm wrapped around her back. They said nothing, because nothing needed saying. In the morning, the world would still be the same. The fence would hold. The cattle would wander. But she would not be wondering anymore where she belonged. She'd already found it. The first frost came without warning. One morning in late September, Violetta stepped outside with a pail to draw water and found the ground crusted white beneath her boots. The grass crackled as she walked. Overhead, the sky was pale and wide, and the aspens on the ridge had begun to yellow. She wrapped the wool shawl tighter around her shoulders and paused at the edge of the porch. Hollis was in the orchard, his back to her, inspecting the apple trees. He moved slow, thoughtful, like a man measuring what could be saved before the hard cold settled in for good. "Will they hold through the winter?" she asked when she joined him, her breath turning silver in the air. "Some," he said. "The older ones'll do better. These young ones took too much heat in July." She touched a branch gently, the leaves brittle beneath her fingers. "You planted these yourself," he nodded. "First spring after I bought the land. Didn't think they'd take, but they came through." She looked at the trees, each spaced with care, their roots holding in dry soil. "They're stubborn, they are," he said, glancing at her. "So are you," she smiled faintly. "I think I had to be." They picked what fruit was left, filling a basket between them. The apples were small and spotted, but the flesh inside was sweet. When they were done, they sat on an overturned crate near the barn and shared one between them, passing it back and forth in quiet. "Didn't think I'd still be here by frost," she said eventually. "You're not just here," he replied. "You've settled in like you belonged all along." She looked down at her hands, the nails lined with dirt from the orchard. "Maybe I always did, just didn't know what it felt like." He didn't say anything to that. But his hand found hers, and their fingers stayed laced together until the wind picked up and they stood to head inside. That evening she found him in the root cellar, organizing what they'd stored. She took in the rows of jars, the baskets of potatoes, the sacks of flour stacked dry and high. He worked with the calm of someone who'd spent years learning what could be counted on when the days turned short. "You ever think about bringing on someone to help?" she asked, brushing dust from a shelf nearby. "Couple times," he said. "But I never trusted anyone to see it through the way I would. Place like this, you can't afford someone who quits when the weather turns." She considered that. "I could do more." "You already do more than I expected," he said. "I mean it. I want to learn all of it, the cellar, the livestock. Even the books." He leaned against the rafter beam, arms crossed. "You thinking about staying through the winter?" She looked at him, steady. "I'm thinking about staying for good." He didn't answer right away. Then he reached into the corner and pulled out a small tin box. He opened it, revealing a simple gold ring nestled on a square of linen cloth. "I bought this 4 years ago," he said. "Didn't know what for, just knew I'd want it ready if the right time came." She stared at it, heart tightening. "I'm not asking for your answer tonight," he said. "But I want you to know I'm not waiting for someone else. I'm not hoping for a different story." She stepped closer, her hand brushing his. "I'm not either." He returned the ring to its box and set it gently back on the shelf, like something that didn't need rushing. Later, she stood at the window while he banked the stove. The first snow had started to fall, quiet and slow, covering the yard in a soft hush. She watched it take the porch, the fence line, the worn path to the barn. Beside her, his shadow stretched along the floor, tall and steady. She turned to him. "My name before was Violetta Granger. I was married once, briefly. I never told you." He didn't look surprised. "You don't owe me silence." "I left him when I was 19, ran with nothing but a train ticket and my mother's brooch." Her voice didn't shake. "I never spoke his name again. Thought maybe if I didn't, he'd stop existing." He stepped toward her, close enough she could feel the heat from his chest. "You're not her anymore," he said. "No," she whispered. "I'm not." He touched her cheek, thumb brushing just below her eye. "You ever want to tell me the rest, I'll be here." And then she leaned into him, not with urgency, but with the calm that came from knowing she would not have to run again. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and certain, covering everything behind them. By late October, the last of the sorrel leaves had dropped from the trees, and the wind came down off the ridgeline with the sharp bite of winter. Violetta had taken over the morning baking, rising before first light to mix dough by lantern and set loaves beside the stove to rise. The rhythm steadied her, warm and solid in ways she hadn't expected. The day she decided, it was pouring rain, not snow, not yet, and the earth smelled like iron and old roots. Hollis was mending the hinges on the cabin door where the wind had begun to rattle it loose, and she came to him with her hands tucked into her apron. "I'd like to marry before the ground freezes," she said, "if you still want to." He set his tools aside and stood. "I do." It was not a grand thing. They spoke with the circuit preacher who came through Elkhorn Ridge once each month, and he agreed to return in a week's time. There were no letters sent, no announcements made. Neither of them wanted a crowd. Just a few neighbors to stand witness, the preacher's voice steady, and two hands joined beneath the open Montana sky. Violetta wore a dark wool dress stitched from an old pattern she'd found in the trunk beneath the bed. She'd let her hair down, braided at the sides, and tucked a pin of blue glass at her collar. Hollis wore the same coat he'd bought when he first came, West brown broadcloth, worn smooth at the elbows. They married by the orchard, where the trees stood bare but strong. The preacher spoke simply, and Hollis answered without pause. When it came her turn, Violetta didn't hesitate. "I marry freely," she said, "and I will not leave." Afterward, they served coffee and bread sweetened with molasses. The neighbors left by dusk, and she and Hollis walked the long footpath home in silence, the grass wet beneath their boots. Inside, he lit the fire while she hung her shawl. Then he turned to her, slower than usual, as if unsure whether to speak or wait. She reached for him first. Their kiss was quiet, but there was nothing tentative in it. He held her firmly, one hand slipping beneath the braid at her neck, and she leaned into him with a certainty that came from months of knowing. He led her to the bed, and she went without fear. The windows steamed with heat, and the rain softened against the roof. In the loft, the wind pulled at the boards, but inside the walls held. They made love like people who had no need to prove anything, careful, deliberate, and unhurried. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving frost glittering on every branch. Violetta stood at the window, wrapped in a quilt, watching the sun break over the ridge. Hollis brought her a cup of coffee, and she took it without a word. "I'll build us a better stovepipe before the snow sets in," he said, settling beside her. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "And I'll sew another quilt. A thick one." He nodded, then placed his hand over hers. "This land's hard, but it's ours now." She smiled, eyes on the frost. "So am I." They spent that winter learning the deep quiet of snowbound days, splitting wood, boiling beans, storing salt pork, reading aloud on long nights. She mended his shirts with her own thread. He carved her a set of wooden spoons, each one different. They argued once about how long to keep the hens penned, and once more when he tried to carry both water buckets without asking for help. But every night ended with her back pressed to his chest, his breath steady in her hair. Come spring, she planted onions and carrots beside the house. He built her a bench under the cottonwood where she liked to sit in the evenings. They made a life. Not grand, not easy, but honest. By the second year, she knew the sound of his boots on the porch without needing to look up. He could read the shape of her silence and know whether to speak or let it be. They didn't say "I love you" in words, but in the way she set an extra biscuit aside for him when he worked late, or how he stayed up with her when her hands ached from sewing. One evening, after the cattle had calved and the creek had run high with meltwater, she told him she was with child. She didn't say it with ceremony, just placed his hand over her belly and let it rest there. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he kissed her forehead. "You'll never be alone again," he said. She believed him. The baby came in early January, born red and squalling in the same room where she'd once stood with her satchel and nowhere to go. Hollis named her Clara after his mother. Violetta cradled her against her chest, exhausted and full beyond reason. That spring, they planted more trees in the orchard, apple, pear, and one plum. Clara napped in a basket beside the rows while they worked. The mountains stood watch, and the wind carried the scent of earth and coming rains. Violetta often thought of the road she'd taken to get there, how far she'd come from Kansas, from silence, from the long ache of not being seen. But she didn't look back. There was nothing behind her she needed. She had a home now and a man who met her where she stood. She had a daughter who would never know the sound of a slammed door or the weight of her mother's fear. She had mornings full of bread and coffee, evenings full of hands that reached and held. And she had love not as a promise, but as a life built plank by plank, breath by breath, never hurried, never taken for granted. They grew old together in that valley, side by side with no need to run again.